5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome, gang, back to Reality's Edge with Doc and Buddy. We are so thrilled and excited to be with you guys as always, exploring the very edge of reality, where things are mysterious, where they're uncertain, where science is just starting to grasp, where religion is reaching for, and where we're all desperate to know what lies beyond. Doc, what's the answer to everything? What's the secret? Tell us.
The secret is we don't have to get anywhere because we're not actually going anywhere. We're just here forever. We're here.
You mean we're just timeless awareness and we don't have to stress out?
We are permanent timeless awareness. So, hey, guys, relax. You're just here forever. But you know where this is, this edge you're talking about. It's a brave new world. That's where we're going.
It is indeed. And it's a world based on not just logic and science, but some things that are intangible, things like consciousness, and that are intended to be intangible. You know, Doc, what I was thinking about recently, and this kind of has been blowing my mind, with the importance of how important this is. I was thinking about how Mars had oceans and an atmosphere. Millions of years ago, Mars had oceans and an atmosphere, and it also had a strong magnetosphere. It was like a bar magnet, you know, and just like a bar magnet with the iron filings, literally just like that. And its magnetosphere protected its atmosphere and its oceans, and it lost its magnetosphere, and it lost its atmosphere, and it's lost its oceans. We see how dry and, you know, apparently lifeless Mars looks, although there may be microbial life there still. And now we're discovering on Earth that because we've gone through the geological record, we can see through the shifting in rocks how there has been pole shifts throughout history. It happens every 100,000 years or so, something like that. And that right now, in the past 300 years, our magnetic field strength has reduced 10%. This is dramatic. It's definitely happening. We have anomalies like the South Atlantic anomaly. And that as time passes, Doc, more solar radiation is going to be coming in and damaging DNA. Life is going to have a hard time coming into the future. Should humanity prepare and start protecting the biosphere and protecting DNA samples? What should we do?
Well, I got to tell you, buddy, this is it's a real issue. I have been reading in Science magazine that we're overdue for a pole shift, and the magnetic shift where the poles shift over, and you know, North Pole becomes South Pole, vice versa. It happens every couple 100,000 years, but you don't know exactly when it's going to happen next. But we're actually due for it to happen again. That doesn't mean it's going to happen next week. So you do get these long-term changes. Now, what you're talking about is something slightly different. You're talking about kind of an erosion of the magnetic field, but it can also switch over.
I think it's part of the natural flip process, is that, you know, there's a little fluctuation. I think they've even done modeling where at different points the field has an incredibly low strength where it would damage everything on the planet that's living.
So it's connected, and there is evidence of it, because you can look at in rocks and things from millions of years ago, which way was pointing north or south, and it's very different from what we have now. And it can, believe it or not, this pole shift is actually a very rapid process. It happens in like under 10,000 years, which is quick in geological universal time. For us, obviously, it's not something we'll see in any lifetime that we have here, but relatively speaking, it's a pretty fast process. I have to mention something here, though. When I was studying with Courtney at the Farsight Institute back in the 90s, this is one of the scenarios we RV'd over and over. It was actually the inspiration for Courtney's book, Cosmic Voyage, because the original title of that book was Planets of Dust. And Courtney had told us that the military viewers had viewed this, that in his scenario, I can't verify this is what happened, but a large object had bounced off Mars' atmosphere and totally eradicated it. There was a close encounter with another large celestial object that came too close to Mars, I don't believe it necessarily impacted Mars, but it swept by and knocked the atmosphere, the magnetic field and stuff, whacked it out of balance. And this is what turned Mars into a planet of dust. The idea being that it used to be like Earth in prehistory. Yes. And there was always this idea that we were the Martians. In other words, they came here and we're them.
And it would make sense if there was life there millions of years ago and there were meteor impacts and microbes ejected into space. And we know life forms like tardigrades, water bears, if you they're adorable, can survive in zero gravity in space and, you know, sub-zero conditions and all that stuff, that maybe we are, you know, panspermia originally from Mars.
You know, there's some days I wake up and I feel like a tardigrade.
You know, I feel like a six-legged water bear. They're adorable little creatures. They are adorable little creatures. Hey, you know what? I have a couple images. If you don't mind, sharing screen for a second here. I can. Let me see how I do it. Share screen. Well, maybe I can't do it right now. But anyway, it was basically I had a couple pictures of the Earth and how the magnetosphere works as we're flying through space, and how when it's weakened, or if it's not like a traditional bar magnet, how a tremendous line, basically, there are highways of electrons and subatomic particles will be funneled to different locations on the planet. And if you're living in those locations, you will be getting a tremendous surplus of subatomic particle radiation.
Absolutely right. And what you're describing is the magnetosphere trails behind us like a tail, but sometimes it gets too far out and it snaps back and it creates these electrical storms. And I wonder if people feel it when it happens. It can snap around, you know, and this magnetosphere is always protecting us from these solar storms and radiation and all sorts of things like this. It would be a lot worse. Electromagnetic radiation, not the ionizing type. But that's due to the Van Allen belts and things like that.
And you would think it would damage all the DNA and all the life forms on Earth, right down to small microbial life forms.
You're right. You are right. Without that, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here.
And if we're in the process of a pole shift, and if I was the leader of planet Earth, and I knew this was going to happen 300 years from now, that the damage would be increasing. It's not going to be one day it turns on. It's going to be a slow increase of you know, solar radiation and cosmic ray damage to DNA of the different life forms on Earth. And it would be a slow increase over time. I would start working on that now. I would get together with the different nations and say, how would we preserve the DNA of all the different life forms on this planet? We should store it at 2 different locations, maybe one on the moon and one on Mars, just so we have backups of everything for our planet and our species, and work on some of the big issues, the big responsibility issues. You know, sometimes it seems like human beings, we're just like kids running around without any parents, you know, to say, hold on a second, you have to have insurance, you have to have a driver's license, you have to think about the future, you have to think about college, and have a bank account. I
like what you know, here's what I recommend people do. You know, my religion is planetary intelligence, and I like to focus on large scale planetary and universal processes because it's fun. It gives my mind something to do besides worrying about myself and other, you know, small scale superficial things that we all worry about every day. So I like to put my mind on these large scale processes, you know, how the galaxies are rotating and the Milky Way. And these things are kind of fun just to imagine because it's very challenging, because we're also trivialized by what goes on every day, that I like to go to the opposite for a few minutes. It's like a meditation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I ended up calling that planetary intelligence because it kind of gets you in context. So this is another exercise for people. And I like it because I haven't thought about it before. Just imagine in your mind this beautiful magnetosphere that kind of envelops the Earth. But it's not a static thing like this around the Earth, like a crystal sphere, like Aristotle and the ancients used to think of the planets, these static crystalline things on these orbits that never changed. It's this kind of moving blob of energy, and it changes shape, and it kind of extends sometimes, and then it kind of comes back. And it's surrounding us, protecting us every single second from, you know, energy, universal energy out there, cosmic rays and the like, that normally would be deadly to life, the type of life we are, biological life. And any one of these solar flares would wipe us out without the magnetosphere.
Yeah.
And so just to kind of imagine it for a few minutes and show some appreciation for this amazing piece of kind of space-time architecture that makes biological life possible. So it's a really good thing to bring up, buddy. Really good thing to bring up.
It's so cool because it seems like to me the universe is so perfectly made for life. Like you have, you know, first space-time, you know, the blackness of space-time just as a playground, like the zoo itself. And then you have to have energy sources like lights, incubator lights for the different life forms. So you throw some suns around and you need, you know, some planets around those suns so they can feed off that energy. And those will be your different, you know, growing areas, your different petri dishes, your solar systems. And each planet will go through a natural process. You know, if it's a more irony planet, it'll have a more irony center and have a stronger magnetosphere.
That's right. That's right.
The center of it will spin, and over time, the outside will cool and harden. Like planets go through this natural process. And I think a magnetosphere is a natural process of a planet that's a little more irony than rocky, like meteorites we find in the universe in general. And that's a natural process. And that maybe with Mars naturally lost its magnetosphere. It didn't even have to have a cosmic impact or anything. It's just part of the natural process of when you cool something down that's been heated up and it slowly cools down. The inside's still warm, like that donut you take out of the oil. You know, the inside's still warm, even though the outside starts to cool down. And that magnetosphere is still spinning, and it slowly slows down and unwinds. And it's a natural process. And maybe Earth has been flipping back and forth because it's losing its magnetosphere, like Mars did. Maybe Mars went through the same process where it flipped back and forth and then finally just lost its magnetosphere. And that's part of the natural planetary evolution. And that there's no magical way to send nuclear weapons to the center of the Earth to kickstart our magnetosphere again, to get it up to those super safe levels that the dinosaurs enjoyed. We're now at the point where technologically and everything, we're at the point where we can finally leave the planet. A species, a living thing can leave the planet technologically at the moment where it actually needs to, before it needs to. You know, dinosaurs didn't have anti-gravity. Dinosaurs didn't have a space program. You know, a lot of different astrobiologists like to joke. But humans do have a space program, and we do have anti-gravity, I believe.
Yes. Dinosaurs in space. I like it. I like it.
Maybe this is why, you know, life is so precious, is considered so precious throughout the universe. Maybe this is why the visitors are here, because they see the clock ticking for a bunch of different reasons. It doesn't have to just be nuclear war. They can warn us about the folly of nuclear weapons and nuclear power and the danger of its long-term poisonousness. But maybe they're also here because they know that our magnetosphere is winding down and there's so many different precious, varied forms of life that maybe they can preserve them in ways that we can't. Or maybe it's us from the future coming backwards in time to fix our mistakes, to say, oh no, in the future, we wanted to save as much DNA as possible. There's something that seems so physical about like the Tic Tac, you know, the Tic Tac UFO incident. It seems so almost human when you see it, even though it flies like it was built like it's being flown by a robot. Even though it seems to move very mechanically, very, you know, automated. There's still something that seems very constructed, almost human about, you know, any craft that has a physical shape. To me, I don't know. There's something about it that seems like within humanity's grasp almost, since we're such masters of building and form and material science. But I don't know, sometimes I think, you know, am I too sensitive worrying about these, you know, long-term issues? But I think humanity has survived because there's been different ones amongst us who've said to the tribe, we have to worry about long-term conditions. We need to save grain for the winter, or we need to, you know, think long-term. That's what makes us different than the other animals too. I think it's a really serious, important consideration that we should be thinking about now.
Yeah, well, I have to be honest, I haven't heard anyone use that time frame as a time frame of concern from my readings about it. So it always seems to be something that could happen in the next couple thousand years. But they always say we don't know exactly, and it's overdue.
Well,
So,
what I heard, the science, the numbers that I heard was in the last 300 years, the magnetic field strength has decreased 10%. So that's the science numbers that I am basing my urgency on. And if that is true in the past 300 years, 10%, and that rate is increasing, that would say to me, I wouldn't want to be below 25% of the field strength, because I would start to think some damage starts to happen around then. Around, you know, if I don't have 75% of my strength, you know, I don't know if that may just be a presumption.
I think here's one thing you might be for discounting a little bit too much, is our adaptability. We don't know our own biological ability to adapt to a slowly changing condition like this, and build up defenses against the radiation over time. And
look at Mars. Look at Mars. How many animals do we see roaming the surface of Mars now? I think having defenses against high forms of high energy radiation is very difficult for a life form. It's conceivable.
But that could have taken place over millions of years in Mars. That's the thing. That's what we don't know, buddy. So I'm not going to put it at the top of my things to worry about, but I do appreciate you bringing it up, because it's something I haven't thought about recently. I do have to tell you, though, a quick story about Mars. You know, I was listening to, was when the Art Bell show was on with Art years ago, and he had, I think, Richard Hoagland on, and this woman called up who said she worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or was it at NASA? It was one of the NASA headquarters. She said they were looking, it must have been JPL, they were looking through seeing the Mars. It was in the 70s, the rovers were there, the first, was it Viking and so forth? Yes, and they made everyone get out of the room all of a sudden, and they put up newspaper. There were windows on the doors, and they put up newspaper. And everyone has to leave the room, and they didn't know what was going on, because they were looking through a live feed through the NASA Viking cameras, right? The rovers that were on there. Forget, that's the Viking 1 and 2, right? 76, I believe it was. So one of the women that she worked with put her eye up right to the crack in the newspaper. They didn't get all, and she saw from the horizon 2 humans walk up to the lander and dust it off. And then in spacesuits, and then walk back off the horizon. They let everyone back in to the room. And this woman really seemed like she knew what she was talking about. So assuming that story was true, what it suggests is there's just more going on Mars than we were told. And that some people always wondered, what would you do with the dust on the rovers? And people said, well, you know, the wind's there, but maybe they had some help.
These little tiny whirlwinds just happened to hit the solar panels and pull all the dust off them twice.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. That's right.
You know,
yeah, go ahead.
I've seen a lot of the interesting remote viewing of Mars is past too, and a lot of the different suppositions about the 9-foot-tall humanoid life forms that kind of lived there. I've seen everything from Joe McMoneagle's remote viewing drawings of the Martians to others' drawings of the Martians. And it's interesting how they have a kind of universal similarity. They all seem to be around 9 feet tall, human bipedal, humanoid, reptilian-ish kind of combo looking. And it's just kind of a fascinating thought, the whole notion of, you know, maybe the visitors aren't coming from as far as we think they are. Maybe we're not as separate from them as we think we are. It opens up so many possibilities when you think about Mars. Mars opens up some very realistic, real, probabilistic notions that could be possible. You know, we could be descendants of Mars, and there could have been intelligent life forms on Mars, and those could be the ones that a small group of them survived, perhaps. Maybe that's who's visiting us now. who knows? It's interesting, though.
We don't know. You know, I've seen pictures. I think it was from Dr. Ken Johnson at one of these UFO conferences of craters in Mars that the color is changing by the seasons.
Yep. I've seen a few of those. Those are really cool.
You've seen those. Suggest algae or plant life of some sort growing, and that may be what's left there. Dr. Richard Hoover, one of my witnesses in Black Swan Ghosts, showed us photographs of snow on Mars that he found in NASA's photo, archives.
And they've admitted the brine, those flowing hills of brine that kind of seasonally come down all of those mountains.
And they found water there recently below the surface, I believe.
There has to be microbial life. There has to be. There has to be microbial.
And what did you think of that picture I sent you a couple hours ago of that object in the air? That's apparently a NASA photo from one of the landers. It really looks, unless it's a glitch, it looks like a little structured object in the air.
Yeah, it looks like it's perfectly right in the middle between what could look like a conceivable glitch, but also, if it's not a glitch, it looks like a structured craft simultaneously. It's perfectly positioned to be both simultaneously.
It's just so, buddy. This brings us to some events that happened just 2 nights ago. Which in Astoria, Queens, you had this transformer flare up that made the skyline of New York City look blue. I didn't see it from my vantage point here, but we were coming back from Connecticut. The Merritt Parkway has a lot of trees, so we didn't see it. But I'm getting a lot of feedback from people about what was really going on there. A lot of people said there were, it had to be directed laser weapons. Just like the Twin Towers, right? The directed laser weapons that they've got them, buddy. They've got them.
The California fires were all done by these directed energy weapons, and
boom, they're coming down. These directed energy from satellites. What do you think?
I don't believe in the directed energy weapons. I have friends.
Why not? They're fun.
I have friends who believe in them. Yes, they exist. I was part of Occupy Wall Street, and I was hit with the LRADs, the sonic weapons. They have weapons. They were, in Cuban embassy and in the China embassy, people are being attacked with all sorts of different frequencies of the electromagnetic field. That's true. It's definitely happening. There are directed energy weapons, DEW, DEWs.
But in this case?
But in this case, no, I don't think the California fires were. I don't think the transformers were. I've been in many hurricanes growing up in Miami, Florida. I've been in numerous hurricanes. And whenever a hurricane comes through and the high winds come through, transformers blow. And on the skyline, you will see some of the most extraordinary stuff that looks right out of a Hollywood special effect. I mean, Independence
Day.
Big time. Big time. Boom. And you can even see bolts and stuff traveling down, and this brings up a point.
Horizontally, the wrath of the gods.
Yes, and I've seen footage of powerful bolts of electricity going down power lines and people being confused whether that's UFO activity or not. There's, a lot of paranormal or parapsychological activity that oftentimes takes the form of energy. Pure energy, but I don't think these are directed energy weapons. No, I think these are natural events. I think when a transformer blows, it releases a tremendous amount of energy. And on a night like that, with a cloud layer was so low, everything illuminated so well. The sky illuminated so well because the moisture and the particles were so low. The fog was so low that night too. I heard a lot of the same things through Stephanie. She sent me the pictures, and I didn't know that it was a national news story. I didn't see it either myself. I'm here. I could have gone outside probably and seen it, but didn't.
Mars attacks.
But you know what? That brings back. Was it you who was telling me that people were saying that it could have been a solar flare that started?
Right.
Like
this is entirely. This is what I read. I read something. I didn't read the article enough. But it's happened before. The 87 Quebec transformer outage, which went all the way up and down the East Coast, I think it caused a blackout in the New York City area for 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
That was caused by a solar flare. And here's what's really interesting about solar flares, buddy. They're all unique. Uh, no two solar flares are alike, so it's very challenging to protect your transformers from them because they come in at different frequencies, and it's like they're playing a musical note, and that musical note is your transformer, and it's too loud, and boom, it's a resonance phenomena. The frequency gets transformed by the transformer. It gets amped up in the way it's not intended to be, but this is what transformers do, right? And
so the power lines act as antennas and pick up, grab the energy, and it goes to the transformers, and the transformers can't take the power load, correct?
Right. And this happened, I believe, in the 1860s. It was called the Carrington event. And it blew out the entire grid of the United States at the time.
Wow.
Now, back then, the only thing that used power lines for electricity were telegraph systems. And I think it took a couple of weeks to get the telegraphs up and running again. People can check. I mean, it may be in a couple of days, but it's called the Carrington event. Now, I will tell you what really frightens meteorologists and emergency planners, and you've heard about this before, is another Carrington event. Because this time, 170 years later, we're talking everything's on the grid. And what happens if everything gets wiped out for a couple weeks? I'm talking everything.
Everything.
Your car, computers.
Bank. The fact that those basic necessities come through electronics nowadays, where they didn't then. Their basic necessities, their food, water, everything is exchanged through electronics. And
Exactly.
we've become so accustomed to having cell phones and communication, people are going to freak the F out if there's ever an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, or a solar flare strong enough to do what you're talking about, having a Carrington event. You know, this stuff's all related. And worrying about
It's related.
You know, having space safety and having a space concern, you know, Trump's space force.
We need a space force.
That's what we need, darn it. If someone was visionary enough to say we need a force to protect space. Because
yes,
space
I love it,
protecting.
buddy. This is a great idea. You should call Trump and tell him to do this immediately.
Space protecting. How did space survive all this time without protecting?
It needs. The thing about this Carrington event, I got to say, before we get to the Space Force, is I have spoken to people in Boulder, Colorado that work with FEMA. I've had meetings with FEMA. Because the people that work at meteorology, you know, there's in Boulder, there is a large meteorological facility at the base of the Flatirons there. I forgot the acronym of it, but it basically does a lot of weather for the whole United States. And those folks meet with FEMA to talk about how to plan for this. And the only thing they've accomplished, as far as I know, is that how do you turn off the power plants at the right rate of speed so that everything doesn't get destroyed? You know, like the brownout, like having a lower level of voltage in the current and amperage. So how do you, let's say you know a solar flare is coming and you have 8 hours warning. That's what you get with the solar flare, 8 hours of warning.
Can you stage down the power levels?
Exactly.
Can you cut them off?
How do you turn it off before everything gets destroyed? So in a day or two later, you can turn it on again. Because if you don't do it right, you lose everything. And guess what? There are not enough transformers to go around. They don't stockpile many of these things. There are only a few here. I can tell you, having survived Hurricane Sandy here in lower New York with my mom back in 2013, right here in this house, that it took about 10 days to get the power on here again, because you got to get transformers in, and
the workmen have to do the physical work to do that stuff. Yeah. It
takes physical people going around to every street corner, and not just getting the lines here were broken from trees falling, but there were transformers blown. We would see them. We'd be here, and all of a sudden there'd be that blue flare like was seen in Astoria.
Yeah.
It'd be a transformer blowing up because something had shorted, things. And then you get fires and you get explosions from propane. Like one thing leads to another. What we're talking about here, buddy, and this is a whole nother topic, we won't go in this direction, is how fragile this system is. We're just talking about losing everyone's data. No financial transactions, no gas at the pumps, because those things communicate through the internet to charge your credit card. I mean, the whole thing stops. We're talking about not having emergency responder vehicles.
Do you think that the country already has resources staged around the country in different places for mega emergencies that cover a bunch of different possibilities, like this possibility to a bunch of other ones where they have, like I've heard stories that there's body bags stored all over the place.
Well,
and concentration camps pre-staged. Camps.
Jim Marrs had written a book about it. I forget the book where he mentioned this, the late Jim Marrs. I'd met Jim many times. I knew Jim, and I actually wrote the foreword for his book. What was his book about remote viewing?
He was one of the most prolific writers, though. I mean, literally one of the most prolific writers.
He wrote the foreword for my book, Opening Minds, and I wrote the foreword for his book, Sci Spies.
Wow, that's great.
And I went down to his ranch once for an amazing conference. Lynn Buchanan was there. Holy moly. That was really we got to go to the site of the Aurora crash of 1892.
Wow, the cemetery and everything?
Yes, that was nearby Jim Marrs' ranch. He lived nearby Aurora, Texas. We went there for a field trip.
Wow.
It was incredible. And
that's one of the things I really love about talking with you is you have touched so much of ufology history, from Ingo to this. I mean, I just love hearing this stuff. I'm sorry to interrupt. Keep going. This is awesome.
No, it's okay. That's just, someone's got to do it. I just figured you just keep pushing the boundaries, keep going on the field trips, and eventually you'll meet the aliens. Went down. So Jim Marrs wrote this book, and I forget what it was, Alien Agenda or one of these. I liked a lot of his work. I didn't agree with all of it, but I liked a lot of it. But this particular point, he mentioned what he thought were, and I don't want to scare people about this, what he thought were pre-staged detainment camps for natural disasters. And he listed 10 facilities throughout the United States. Now, one of them was right near Boulder, and it's called Table Mountain. And it was this
Table Mountain, yeah.
Weird flat mountain. I went by it after reading his book, and I did see a sign on the gate. It said Deep Space Research Center. Do not trespass. And it had something to do with NASA. There were radio telescopes out there and all sorts of stuff. But I knew someone who had a house up above that Table Mountain on the foothills in Boulder. Wow. I actually taught her RV class at her house.
Wow.
And I asked her one day, I forgot her name, but it was up on Lee Hill Road there and overlooking Table Mountain. I mean, it's just down there in Longmont. So I said, in that area. And I said, I read this about this thing being like a facility. And she said, I have to tell you the truth. I've never seen anything happen there. And there's never been any doors open, no vehicles drive across the top of that. So if that's true, I don't see any evidence of it.
It sounds very Dulce to me. Sounds very Dulce, New Mexico to me.
Well, it could be. I just for someone who had looked down on it every day from her house, she never saw anything suspicious there. So
we know
that doesn't discount it. I just can't say it's an unknown. It's a gray area.
Yeah. Well, I think this kind of all circles us around the point about this space force and this this protecting the Earth and thinking about our future and all these different things. And, what does it mean to be a responsible, intelligent, evolved life form on a planet like ours at this point in a civilization? Is it a responsible thing to start having discussions about, pole flipping and magnetic fields weakening and preparing for that? And
well, I think I think at a minimum it gives people awareness, and we can start imagining alternative possibilities and the way we would like it to go. I mean, it's not a bad idea. But
I think as you say the same thing, I think the same thing about the Space Force. It's unrealistic to say that we are not going to take weapons into space. I do not want to see space militarized. I do not want to see weapons in space. I don't want to see weapons in heaven. It just sounds patently on the face of the words ludicrous, taking weapons to heaven. But there are going to be space forces. And we have to have that discussion, and we have to think and talk about it. And it's not foolish to have the discussion and to explore this thought. And it's not foolish to explore the defense of the planet and to worry about solar flares and to worry about staging of resources in case of global phenomena. I think that's what a responsible parent does for their child. You buy insurance in case something happens, the remote possibility that things happen. That's the whole purpose of insurance. You know, and I think we need to think about the insurance policies, about these big things, these big issues, and think responsibly.
You know,
or party.
I have to tell you, I don't want this to sound like a cop-out, but I believe there's alternative possibilities. And I believe in the parallel realities that surround us. There are some realities where we're getting exterminated and fried by cosmic rays. And there's another reality where we just moved into a realm where it doesn't bother us. And I'd rather not worry about it, of all the things I could be worried about. But you've given me a lot of, you've raised it in my awareness tonight talking about it as something that I'm going to study a little more to see what the data show. How about that?
You know, ultimately, I think it's fun to explore these. You know, I'm not going to go and change my day about it. There's nothing like, you know, I can necessarily do. You know, I can maybe reduce my carbon footprint a little bit and maybe help to try and preserve my atmosphere that way. But, you know, realistically, I'm going to continue to, like what we do with this show, is enjoy the journey. It's not about a specific destination. It's about exploring these thoughts. They're mental
I like to explore it, but we shouldn't explore it with fear and with worry.
You're right. You're so right.
That's
I don't want to make
my only concern. I just want to explore it objectively without passing judgment one way or another, whether
that's a great point.
It's just data at the moment. I'll tell you why, buddy. I have to be honest. Back at the Estes Star Vision Conference in 1996, where I saw my first channeling from the entity BASHAR live.
Yes.
I mean, back then, I had never heard BASHAR before. If those of you who haven't heard
Daryl Anka.
BASHAR.org, wonderful information. You can believe it or not, it doesn't matter. It's just very interesting to listen to. You choose what it means to you. But I've learned a lot from it. And that was my first encounter with channeling. And I thought for the first half hour, I thought, this guy's just a good actor. He's making it up. I mean, you can't, if you haven't seen him before, it's very hard to
He is an incredible performer.
Many channelers, they're totally different personality all of a sudden. If you haven't encountered it, it's shocking. And after about half an hour, I thought, nobody could keep talking that fast. And no actor could even do that, not even Robin Williams.
And he's incredibly fast improviser. In the second, he reacts to people, cuts them off, and has an answer so quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So after about an hour, I thought, this is real. I don't understand it, but this is interesting. And I came back the next day for his workshop about the nature of space and time. It was still fascinating. And, but there were a lot of interesting presenters there. But one of them was a guy named Drunvalo Melchizedek. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No.
Drunvalo Melchizedek. He hasn't been on the scene recently, but he told us that we all needed to get prepared for a pole shift that was coming in 2000. And it was going to wipe out our memories if we didn't purchase his course. No, he was serious, buddy.
I want to tell all the listeners that their memory is going to be wiped out if they don't purchase a full season of Reality's Edge, which is free, actually, on YouTube.
Silicone snake oil.
You are going to, well, he didn't throw in quantum. There is a quantum wave approaching.
It's going to scramble your mind if you don't follow my instructions very carefully.
Yes.
And during the special seminar we'll be having tomorrow, I'll be giving you the treasure map where the treasure is buried.
Can I address the Daryl Anka thing for a second? Because I think this is important.
Please.
I was fascinated with Daryl recently, and it's so interesting that you bring him up in BASHAR. And I was taken back by how great he is at what he does. And I saw at different points him say different things about his ability. And he said different things at different times. When he says things like, this is really my higher self talking through my subconscious, And it's really an incarnation of my best self, most liberated, without censors, just coming out of my subconscious real me. When he says that stuff, I'm like, oh, I gravitate to that. I can relate to that. I believe that. But when he says it's definitely an interdimensional being, definitely did all these different things to him, I don't believe him as much there, because I know from being a performer myself, I've been a character actor and I worked in, in films and things like that. And I've seen actors make dramatic transformations where you are stunned that it's the same person, how they speak, they walk, they do everything different. And that's the amazing thing about the human being, is our ability to mimic. But I also think that we all have this higher level us, a super us, that lives beneath the surface, that is kept down by social pressures, by self-censoring, by saying you can't speak this way, you can't talk that way, you can't cut people off, da 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 da. And that's who Daryl Anka let free. That's who Bashar is. It's a really brilliant guy inside Daryl. Daryl's just a really smart guy. I don't believe it's an alien entity. I don't, personally, and I've seen a lot of his stuff. But I do believe it's an inspired, higher form of himself. And in that, he's tapping into something. He's tapping into the Lyman or the Akashic record. He's tapping into the place where you tap into with remote viewing. I prefer to believe that side of it, which is just as mysterious as believing that he is truly tapping into an interdimensional being. Now, of course, there's those who are going to say, in a universe as diverse as ours, there's going to be a creature like Bashar somewhere. And maybe he is truly connecting to and resonating with whoever Bashar is, even if it's just an exact identical thing to his subconscious thoughts. But, either way, however you look at the Bashar thing, I think the message is right on about living in the moment to your fullest and be happy in the moment, be the best you in every moment, and you're changing dimensions every second. You're traveling between parallel universes every second. And every second you need to be the best you can be. And you are being the best you can be at that moment. And don't freak yourself out, and all those wonderful things. So I think there's one of the things I guess I'm learning from doing these episodes with you is I oftentimes struggle with my left brain. My brain wants to be logical and think about problems and be like, oh, Mars has lost its magnetosphere and Earth's losing ours. We need to protect ourselves. But you know what? The other right side of me says, just go with it. Human beings are going to be fine. We're survivors. We survive. And then when I look at people like Daryl Anka, how reactive and improvisational in the moment he is, I realize that human beings are very improvisational and reactive in the moment and transformational in the moment, and that we can handle anything. If we have a solar flare and we're not prepared for it and we don't have stuff staged around and we lose all the stuff, human beings will survive. We'll get through it. There won't be mass chaos. There'll be mass chaos, but we'll survive. You know what I mean? The human spirit is pretty freaking indomitable. And that's what Daryl also helps to remind me of. And I think it's important to think about in thinking about all these issues, the Space Force and that stuff. I think the human spirit, we get scared. We're fearful of the reality's edge. We're fearful of things on the edge of our understanding. We want to protect ourselves.
Bashar has encouraged us from the beginning, and I've always found this very helpful, is to make the unknown your friend. Regardless of what you believe Bashar is or who he is, or if it's just Daryl's subconscious, it doesn't really matter. We won't know for a while. Bashar's made predictions, and we'll see if they come true out through 2037 about contact and so forth. And that remains to be seen. But this is the interesting thing. I always found it useful. Instead of being afraid of things that you don't understand and RV and where did that impression come from, that you kind of see it as something that's fun and exciting rather than something that's scary. And that has to do with the definitions we get from society about what things are, what they mean. And Bashar has encouraged us to redefine them in a way that's more helpful to you instead of just repeating all the social conditioning you got from your parents and your teachers. And as a sociologist, I have to say that is totally valid. We just end up repeating like robots what we heard as 5-year-olds. And what people, entities like Bashar, whatever they are, personalities like Bashar encourage us to don't just keep doing what you've been doing. Why don't you do something else and believe something else? And if you don't want to change, then what are you getting out of it to stay the same?
And to me, it also,
what's the secondary gain you're getting? Yeah, what's the gain that you're getting out of not changing? Because I guess his point is that you have a choice at every moment in your life, not what's happening to you, but how you handle it, how you deal with it, how you react to it.
Big time. Great.
Right? I mean, they're big. The BASHAR, first of all, BASHAR is technically, according to them, 250 million minds linked together. He says that their society is telepathic. I'm not saying this is the way it is. This is what he says, that in their civilization, all the minds are telepathically linked.
Well,
so
it makes sense that
it's a lot of minds working at once.
Yeah, hive mentalities seem like a logical thing at a certain technological level. That a hive mentality seems almost inevitable on some level.
Yeah. So, I mean, that would sort of make sense if we keep practicing RV and doing this. We'll develop these, and you could imagine ourselves 800 years in the future, kind of more telepathically enabled. So a lot of it doesn't seem really so far out as it could be. Just look how much we've changed in 20 years. It's a lot of stuff's changed since I started getting involved in this whole area. I mean, I have to tell you, a lot of people don't react so negatively to this stuff anymore. They're curious. I find amongst young people, they're extremely interested. Just at a Christmas party a couple days ago with cousins in Connecticut, there was a lot of curiosity from some people amongst these topics. I mean, I was talking metamaterials, the TTSA stuff, and people were listening. And there were all sorts of people there. It was in Greenwich, so...
You know what's giving us traction? I think what's really giving us traction is, it sounds crazy, but the world of science is giving us a foothold into the world of the people who normally don't touch this topic. In the past, it was considered very, very fanciful. But when you have physicists who have drilled down on reality to the point where they realize reality is not what it appears to be at this level, at this size level to humans, it appears like reality is a certain way, but as you go down to smaller and smaller, things, reality is different, and it's at different scales. It's different things, and physicists know.
Buddy, I got to say something about that. This is one of the themes we keep talking about on Reality's Edge, is the fractal nature of the universe.
Yes.
A physicist wrote me recently in response to one of my videos. He said it's called the self-similar universe idea, that at atomic scales or galactic scales, you still have these self-similar patterns scaling up and down. So guess what I read in Science magazine just yesterday? That galaxies all have smaller dwarf galaxies associated with them, including the Milky Way. And guess what? The smaller dwarf galaxies have even smaller
dwarf.
And they said it was just an idea until they looked at some data and compared it to the simulation versus what the data showed, and it fit the fractal model. And this is just from this is just from a brand new Science issue. So it just shows, again, one of our themes here is how much we don't know, why that's a good thing, because we're discovering that there are these amazing connections from the macro to the micro. We're not talking metaphysics. We're talking fractal geometry, something I can quantify. I can put the math to it. It's something you can,
it repeats because it works. It repeats.
It works. It's reality. It's the way it works. We're not talking about philosophy here. We're talking about data.
Yep. Fibonacci, all those stuff.
The self-similar universe is really interesting because you have to ask why. And I'm not going to get into that, but it's just... So, yes, this is what we see at these different levels. And it's fascinating. And we've talked about fractal UFOs. You've had a lot of videos. You've had some about this, about the smaller ones, and it's just an interesting idea. And we lose the fractal dimension by the way we design everything in square shapes, and our modern architecture. We've lost sight of that, which is maybe why we're messed up, is because we're not.
But maybe it's still fractal.
What's that?
Maybe it's still fractal. Sometimes when I see a city, I'm in like New York City, I'm still always amazed on how when I pull out, it becomes like this weird, almost unreal, surreal kind of ant colony. And it takes on these geometries that kind of remind me of different things in nature, from beehives to animal colonies.
No, it is. It's fractal. But any single building, though, isn't. It's the entire layout, because it's not designed by any one person. It's haphazard. And as some people point out, cities last longer than countries or governments, right?
Mm. Yeah, interesting point.
And they have their own self-organizing. I mean, even the people at the Santa Fe Institute look at cities as far as fractal pattern, self-organization. And you're right, it's all cities have it, but particular structures sometimes don't.
Maybe
then you get sick building syndrome.
Maybe the whole thing is, from all of this, from my frantic worry and concern about the magnetosphere to Daryl Anka, maybe the whole lesson in today's learning, as we've learned together, or as I'm learning, is not to worry about the struggle. Have faith in humanity's sensorless, subconscious, reactive spirit.
Yeah.
The ability to explore and to solve and have that adventurous spirit, everything that this show stands for. You know, that thing that Daryl Anka says when he takes off his sensors and says, I'm going to be BASHAR and not care what anyone thinks. I'm not going to censor any part of my thought. At any moment, I'm going to be completely free. And that's how we should be in the exploration of life. That's why I love this show.
I agree. I don't think, you know, contrary to many people and what they think we can do with RV, I don't think you can predict the future exactly, or it wouldn't be reality as we know it. Not the reality that we're all familiar with. But it doesn't matter. You don't need to predict it. It's how you react to it that matters. It's not what happens, because anything could happen and anything does happen. But it's how your state of mind in that situation that determines what it becomes. Because even things that seem very negative can, in the long term, turn into positives. And we all know examples of that every day. So we don't have to lecture about that. But I think that is the big theme here. And that's, Buddy, that's personally why, even though I enjoy hearing from you about the magnetosphere and all, it's fascinating. And I love it from a scientific point of view, but it's neutral. It's ultimately neutral. That's my point of view. I'm not saying you have to believe that or anyone else has to. That's just the way I look at it.
No, but my opinions changed. From the beginning, I was more concerned. I was more concerned for all the life forms on Earth because I love this biosphere and I'm corny like that. And at the end, I realized that I have to have faith again, like I do with my own spirit, in the human spirit, and our ability to improvise in the moment, and our ability to problem solve, and our ability to deal with the worst situations, even if they happen. You know, I know that I can handle emergencies pretty well. I've got a calm spirit. I've been through a lot of different things in life, and I think humanity can as well too. And I'm not as worried about as humanity, perhaps maybe as I was at the beginning of this conversation. That's why I love.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. And the very fact that we're having this conversation right now, and that our viewers are listening to it, shows that something's working pretty well, or we wouldn't be doing this. I mean, something, I don't know what it is, but something's working pretty darn well for even you and me to connect, to be able to have these discussions with this almost magical technology. And for people to be able to watch it and comment back. And I think there's something magical about it. I have to say, that's what it feels like to me.
I do too, and I think it's really special, and it's such an opportunity, and it's a blessing to communicate and learn with everybody. You know, I consider myself an enthralled student, and so when I talk and converse with you, I'm learning each episode. I'm learning during the episode, as the episode happens, and we're, you know, recording that. And at the same time, as I think we're kind of sharing knowledge and exploring, and we're being truly adventurous scientists with that real scientific spirit that they used to have in the 1800s. That's restrained, you know, where you can get a little dirty and messy and have, you know, junk on your lab coat, and it's okay.
Well, it's like what Robin Williams said many times. We're all born with a little bit of craziness. Don't waste it.
Great. I think that's a great way to end the episode right there. We couldn't say anything better.
Yeah, don't waste it. It's precious.
It's precious.
Don't do what Robin did. You can make it through even the most toughest stuff. So don't go the way. But that's a piece of wisdom. And they were crazy good scientists back then because they didn't quit and they weren't dependent on public opinion. And these massive, well, we'll get into this in another episode, military, industrial, scientific grant systems that really controlled what we study and, you know, became shut up and calculate. Don't have conversations about meaningful events. And then this show is totally the opposite of this. And this is where it's going, because the things we're going to see, and this brings us to our next episode, I think we're going to see some amazing stuff coming up in 2019. And we want to invite our listeners to join us on December 31st. We will have our predictions episode.
Not only predictions, but some of us might even be remote viewing certain things, from the stock market to geopolitical circumstances, and we will tell you our predictions for the future for the year 2019.
Yes.
And if you make money off of our predictions, you can send the money to Dr. Simeon Hine. But we will have predictions.
So we will be back in 2 days
Yes.
from now. By the evening, we will have this episode up, and we will have our 2019, what's in store for us with the UFOs 2019 predictions and discussion show. Okay.
I'm excited for it, as I am for every episode of Reality's Edge.
And send us any questions you have in the comments below for this video, and we will respond on Monday night. We will have it up by Monday night because we're recording it in the afternoon. So put your comments below about what you want us to discuss, predict, and look in our crystal balls to see the future of 2019.
And click subscribe wherever that is.
Yeah, somewhere on the page. All right, folks. Thanks for joining us again. Thanks a lot, buddy.
Thank you, gang, and everyone for joining us on Reality's Edge.
We will see you in the next episode. Take care.
Ow!